Good evening, everyone. Um, Thank you for coming for the INA IISc webinar. So it's my pleasure to have Dr. Ravi Shankar give the talk today. So I'd like to very quickly introduce him. So he's a principal researcher at Microsoft Research India. He's been there since 2015. Prior to that, he was a Simons postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University from 2014 to 2012 to 2014. He finished his PhD from Carnegie Mellon University and he has a BTech from IIT Madras. Ravi Shankar's interests are broadly in algorithms and optimization, with an emphasis on designing provable algorithms which are robust to noise and those which handle uncertainty and dynamic inputs. I'm happy to note that he's a recipient of the INA Young Engineer Award in 2019 for his research in these areas. With that, I shall almost hand over the thing. Before that, let me just say we have this webinar series once a month in every third Thursday or fourth Thursday. So do keep looking out for these announcements. We have topics from pretty much the entire gamut of areas that INA covers. So we look forward to your participation. So with that, I shall stop and I'll hand over the floor to Ravi. Ravi, all yours, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nilesh, and it's very nice to be giving this talk. So hopefully, I'll try to cover like the big picture and then get into the technical aspects of this work. And if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. And so this is going to be the outline of this talk, right? So we are going to talk about emerging paradigms for search, web scale search. And more specifically, I'm going to be talking about the use of embeddings and also the fundamental problem of nearest neighbor search. So let me start with the big picture. So if you look at web search, and if you type in a query, you get the like search results instantaneously. So let's look at what really happens behind the scenes for web search, right? So this is like a super bird's eye view. So I might be like cheating at many points and many places here, but it serves. I think it serves the purpose for intuition. So let's look at the search problem, right? So we search for something, and then immediately, like within milliseconds, we get the results for what are the most related documents for the query. So what goes on behind the scenes for such a search engine, right? So the first step is to crawl the web to get all the documents or all the websites that are out there on the internet. So this the search engines do by what is called crawling. They simply traverse all the links and all the connections that are there. So if it's completely disconnected, I guess it's probably not crawled. Uh, and then you collect all the documents. And this actually ends up being loads of data. So according to Google, they collect uh, 100 million gigabytes of data in this process. So that's, I guess you can get a sense of how many documents that are there, right, from this. So once you collect all the documents, what do you do with it, right? You just don't have a dump of this. You build a catalog or an index. More technically, it's called an inverted index. And so it's you can think so for intuition, you can think of it as the last few pages of your book, right? Which says for all the words that are there, which pages have those words, right? Where do these words occur? Similarly, for all the words that appear ever, which all documents contain those words, right? So that sort of thing is called the inverted index. So it's a pretty tedious process, but it's worth the effort, right? Because it makes the search happen really quickly. Once you build this inverted index and once you get to maintain this inverted index very well. So this is here is an example. So you have three documents that are there. So you first get all the important relevant words, and then you build a table which contains all the documents for each word. So in this example, the word best appears in document 2, the word hangs appears in document 3, and so on. So you have a list of all the documents that each word appears in. So this is called an inverted index. So what do you do at search time? So the important thing at search is that the search has to be really fast. And if you look at Google, I think from what I Google, there are around 100,000 searches per second that happen. I mean, at this is the rate at which searches are happening. So you need the results to be really fast. Uh, And moreover, the user should not like be waiting on the result for a long time, right? So what you see is like instantaneous results. So how that happens with inverted indices is fairly straightforward. So you first get the query, you break up the query into these words, and for each word, you look up the inverted index. You see what all documents contain this word. You aggregate all of this, and then you sort of do some sort of a post filtering. So this is the bulk. The bulk of the effort is in this step. Because after this, you have a small set of relevant documents, and then you can re-rank using, I mean, the importance of the website, how relevant it is to the query, some sort of similarity, and so on. And then you output your search results. So, but the bulk of the effort is in like filtering out like from the billions of websites, how do you get the relevant like top say 1,000, top 2,000, and then you can do a post filter. And this inverted index serves to do precisely that task. Okay, so but if you look at this, right, this traditional approach works for exact matches. Like if I look up search, I mean there is a word search here in my query, so I only go to this inverted index corresponding to search and retrieve all the documents for search, right? But there are other words that sound like search, right? That mean exactly the same thing as search. For example, like maybe like the query. There are many words that mean the same thing as search that are related to search, right? So inverted index based match won't look for those related words, right? Or it's a big task to like actually hard code all the related words for every word, and then that makes the task even more hard, right? So it won't really do that. But if you look at the way modern day search works, it actually takes care of semantic similarity. So when the user searches for say Jaguar, it shows many things, right? It shows Jaguar the animal, it shows Jaguar the car, it shows other luxury cars which don't even contain the word Jaguar in them. It shows other animals that are like Jaguar, maybe the leopard, cheetah, and so on. So it does take care of semantic search, but the framework that I described won't handle this, right? It will only handle like documents that literally contain the word Jaguar. It won't do the semantic search. It won't show like BMW or whatever other luxury cars, right? So it's a hard task. So how do modern day systems deal with this, right? So this is where deep learning comes into play. So with the advent of deep learning and neural networks and a lot of compute, we've come up with a lot of like, I mean, sort of like very spectacular uh, applications or use cases of all of this. Okay, so one such thing is this notion of vector embeddings of words or documents. Right? So what this does is you take all the documents or all the, I mean, for simplicity, let's forget about documents. Let's only look at words, right? You take all the words in the English language and you pass them through some cleverly designed deep learning network, right? This is a deep learning system in the center of this picture, this one here. And the output of that system, if you look at the last layer of this deep learning network, you get like values for each of these outputs. So you can treat them as a vector output, right? So basically what you have is the input is a word and the output is an associated vector. So for dog, I have a vector here, which is a 5-dimensional vector. All of these are 5-dimensional vectors. Cat has a different vector, car has a different vector, and so on. So what is the beauty of this embedding? There are many popular embeddings that convert verbs into vectors. Beauty of these embeddings is that they preserve. Oh, by the way, like what? Okay, so let me just finish the beauty. So the beauty is that objects that are semantically similar are actually have vectors that are close to each other. For example, if you look at dog and cat here, right, those vectors are a distance of 7 apart. But if you look at a dog and a car, those two vectors have a distance of 37, which is much more than 7. Similarly, a car and a ship are close to each other. And what notion of proximity do I use for this talk is the most standard notion that we typically encounter, which is the Euclidean distance between two points in this vector space, right? You just take all the coordinates, so take the difference of those coordinates. They could be positive or negative. So let's square it to just get non-negative values. Add it up and take a square root again. So this is like, if you think of 3-dimensional points, this is like the straight line distance between these two points in 3D space. It's a natural generalization to like higher dimensional space. Because you don't know the dimension of this embedding, it could be a high dimensional embedding. So we can't just deal with 3D or 2D. It might even be like 100 dimensional or 1000 dimensional. So it's the standard notion of Euclidean distance. So in this case, if you like you have like 2 minus 0 squared, which is 4, plus 0 plus 4 squared, which is 16, plus 5 squared, which is 25, plus 2 squared, which is 4, and you take a square root of it. So that happens to be 7. So that's the notion here of distance that we talk about. By the way, are you able to see what I'm writing on the screen, or is it just only am I seeing those, whatever I'm writing?
We are able to see it, Ravi.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Thanks.
just wanted to. Okay. So the beauty of these embeddings, which I'm not going to go into, and I'm not an expert myself, I don't know how these work so well, but beauty is that objects that are close to that are semantically similar to each other have vectors that are close to each other. So that's the thing. Here is a little another illustration in 2 dimensions. So I mean, most of these pictures I pulled up online, so I should give due credit to wherever I picked them up from. So here is another picture that I found, where they have a 2-dimensional embedding of these words into 2-dimensional space. As you can see, the vectors corresponding to man and woman, which are just points in 2D in the plane because it's 2-dimensional, they are much closer than say man and London or something else, right? So or join and international. So close words are actually, I mean, semantically similar words are close to each other in the vector sense. So that's here is a draw example. In reality, these embeddings don't come in 2 dimensions; they come in 100 dimensions or maybe even 1000 dimensions. So what do you do, right, with these embeddings? So this is a very powerful object. What do you do with them? So you can try to do like vector search to get. So when the query arrives, right? So here is what you can do. So you can do something in the following way. So first, I take all the words, or I mean, I could throw in a document into the embedding also, but let me say for simplicity, I take in all the words that are there in the English language and then pass them through this embedding. I mean, a more direct way of solving this problem is to actually take all the documents that are there and feed them to the neural network, and each document is vectorized into a corresponding vector. Right? So each website or each document, you feed it through the neural network, and it gives you a vector output. This vector is in 100 dimensional space or 1000 dimensional space. So for this talk, let's assume 100 dimensional space. The number of vectors is huge, right? It's a billion, at least a billion vectors. So sometimes it could go close to a trillion vectors. So depending on the use case. Similarly, when the query arrives, I pass the query through this neural network, and it gives me a vector. That's the green dot here in this picture. So what's the search problem now reduces to the geometric question, right? So if I want the closest documents for this query, I really want the closest red vectors to this green dot. So this is actually a classical problem. It's a very geometric problem, right? I have a lot of vectors, a lot of points in high dimensional space, and a query point arrives, and I want the closest base points to this query point in high dimensional space. And that's called the k nearest neighbor search problem. And so now, I mean, you can see this as a black box object. How does this fit into the grand scheme, right? So when the query arrives, we can vectorize the query, and it gives me a vector. And then I pass it through this k nearest neighbor search problem, which is the meat of this talk. The entire crux of the talk is that this nearest neighbor search problem. It gives me the relevant vectors to this query. These vectors could themselves be documents, in which case I just filter them and present them as search results. Or these vectors could be like words or something, right? If it's an embedding search over words, then I have to pass through the words again over the inverted index, and then retrieve the search results. So this is the sort of, just to show where this problem fits into the grand scheme of things, I have this illustration. Okay. So what is this ANNS problem that I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk? So it's the nearest neighbor search problem. So it's a very geometric question, computational geometric question, and it's a very well-studied fundamental question, but I'll just formally state it. So we are in the offline step, we are given n vectors. You can think of them as n points in d-dimensional space and Euclidean distances, let's say. So what we have to do is we have to pre-process and build what is called an index. This is like a data structure. And what happens in the online step is when the user types in a query, it's again vectorized. So you see a query queue, which is again a vector in d-dimensional space. And the query goes through the index, and we have to output the k closest vectors from the base set of n vectors. And this is the real question. This is actually the exact nearest neighbor search problem. And this is a fundamental problem both in theory and in applications. Fundamental in theory because the techniques you come up with have a variety of applications, and they are I mean, it's a really challenging question. And like I said, like it's a fundamental problem in practice because of just the scale at which they are used and the diversity of applications. So any improvement will have like a huge impact cutting across application domains. So I mean, it's such a simple problem to state that it has a variety of applications. So all of them will benefit from the improvement of this problem. If you look at exact retrieval, right? If I want the best k closest base vectors to any query vector, there's a result. There's a beautiful result in theoretical computer science that says that more or less you have to do like a brute force. So what's a brute force? You have to look at the query vector, compare distances to all the base vectors. So and to compute the distance, it's like this. I have to do this L2 distance, right? X1 minus Y1 squared plus X2 minus Y2 squared and so on. So that's like D operations for each base vector. Like there are D multiplications and D additions. I can ignore the square root, I guess. So it's just D multiplications, D subtractions, D multiplications, and D additions. And I have to do this for n such points, right? So that's order of ND compute. And that's actually really slow. For the n that we are looking at, it will take, I mean, this is like a very optimistic case of hundreds of seconds per query, but it probably takes much more than that. Right? So that's, I mean, we don't see this in practice, right? We type in a query into Google and we don't need to wait for hundreds of seconds before the search results come. We get it instantaneously. So what the compromise that we settle for is we settle for approximate retrieval. So we don't really shoot for like exactly the k closest vectors. Some sort of like some approximate notion of flow proximity is okay for us. So what we do, the way we measure the quality of an algorithm is what is called recall. Recall is really the fraction. So the algorithm outputs some k candidates, right? You intersect that set with the true k nearest neighbors and see what is the common intersection. So the closer to k that is, the better the algorithm. So if you look at the size of the intersection and divide it by k, that's a number between 0 and 1. That is what I will refer to as recall for this rest of this talk. And so we want to get as high a recall as possible. And I mean, of course, we can do brute force and get a recall of 1. So we also want the latency, the end-to-end waiting time, to be as small as possible for each query. Alternately, I could measure the throughput, which is a number of queries that the system processes per second, to be as high as possible, while the recall is also high. So this is the approximate nearest neighbor search problem, and this is what we're going to focus on in this talk. It's like a tremendously well-studied question, in theory, in practice, in various application domains. So I just did a quick Google Scholar, and if you see, like, the number of results is just staggering, right? So all these problems talk about this problem. All these papers talk about this problem, and I will also be talking about this problem. So I mean, we obviously can't go into all the various techniques that are there for this problem. So I will just quickly talk about two approaches that are relevant for us. So one will tackle this issue of scale. Since we are talking about like web search, we have like billions to trillions of vectors that we want to build an index over. So the first approach will help us deal with the scale of the problem. The second approach will help us deal with the accuracy or recall of the problem, and we will sort of talk about our approach which builds on these approaches. Okay, so what's one relevant approach for us is this notion of compression-based schemes. So basically, if you think about it, right, like if you have trillions of vectors in 100-dimensional space, just storing the vectors themselves is going to take up enormous amounts of memory. So this compression-based approach says, let's not worry about storing the vectors as it is. Let's actually clump together a bunch of related vectors into like a class, an equivalence class, and let's only store the representative vector for each equivalence class. So in this case, it's like some sort of a lossy encoding, right? So all these black vectors are snapped into this red vector in each cluster, and we only remember the red vectors. So that gives us like a huge savings in terms of what we need to store in the index. But obviously, there's a lot of loss in this encoding because all the black, you can't distinguish between all the black vectors that are snapped to any given red vector. So this is what I call a compression-based scheme. So it works very well for scale, but the recall takes a hit because of this lossy encoding. Another scheme is a graph-based scheme. So I mean, I'll talk more about a graph-based scheme later. So for this slide, you don't need to know what a graph-based scheme is. The only point you need to know is that they give like great performance. Like recall versus latency is very good in practice in real-world datasets, but it does not scale well because it has a lot of auxiliary data structures that it needs to store in memory. So the scalability is not as good as compression-based schemes, but the recall is very good and the throughput is also very good. So if you take the state-of-the-art solutions that I just talked about, so these are the two state-of-the-art solutions that are most relevant to us. If you take these and apply it to this scale, web search scale, what really happens here? So if you take a trillion point vector set, if you want to index them using like the high recall solutions, the graph-based schemes, you would need like almost 50,000 machines, which are actually good machines, like industry scale machines, not like commodity, like not like your laptop. You would need like 50,000 such good machines constantly doing this just for this task. So that's a huge cost, operational cost. Alternately, I could compromise on the quality of results and go for these lossy schemes, but then the search results aren't as good. Right? So this is really the trade-off that existing state-of-the-art solutions face. So, and why they don't really scale, why this issue of scale arises, is that both of these approaches that I spoke about store whatever they store. They do some pre-processing and they build some data structure. Right? They store the data structure in main memory, and main memory is very expensive. And indeed, the conventional wisdom prior to some recent works, our work along with some other works, is that if you want this problem, approximate nearest neighbor search problem, your entire algorithm, whatever it stores, has to be stored in main memory. And that's really the conventional wisdom. And if you look at the blog of these popular graph-based search algorithms, they say that, okay, it has to be stored in main memory, even if you store it on very fast SSDs, which are much cheaper, by the way, they will be big performance hits. That is, this work, actually, the main aim of this work, or the starting point of this work, was to question this conventional wisdom. Do we really need to store the entire thing in RAM? Can we design AMMS algorithms which have good properties, desirable properties, high recall and low latencies, using SSDs, for example? And that's what we answer affirmatively, and indeed we can do such a thing. Okay, so this is what I'm going to focus on for this rest of this talk. So this is joint work with a couple of interns and also a couple of full-time researchers, colleagues in the lab in Microsoft Research. Devrit and Rohan were interns. Harsha is a full-time employee. Gopal is an FTE, and Suhas was an intern also when this work happened. So we can actually index. We can design an algorithm that can build an index over 1 billion points on a single machine, and the machine is also not like a super expensive machine. It only has 32 GB RAM and 2 terabit SSD. Okay, and we can get very high recall, 95% recall. And the latency is also very fast, 5 milliseconds. All you need to do is, once you feed in the query, it retrieves the results in 5 milliseconds. If you compare it with the previous work, right, that I spoke about, if you want similar accuracy, you could only handle 100 million points on a similar machine, or you give up on the accuracy and you can do 1 billion points, but the recall comes down to 50%. So you will retrieve only like 5 out of 10 candidates are good. Whereas we can get like 95% recall and also very low latency. Okay, so this is the system, and already, right, we can, if you see like if you want like a trillion point index, you would only need 1,000 machines, because we can, on each machine we can do 1 billion points. We would only need 1,000 machines as opposed to 50,000 machines or like tens of thousands of machines if you take existing approaches. So that's the savings that we could have using this sort of a scheme. Okay, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, I'll get into the technical details of this. I'll give you an overview of like how these algorithms are built. I may not cover the entire details, but just like a high-level overview of how such ANMS algorithms are built, designed.
Ravi, just wait for 20 seconds because there's a slight delay.
Yeah.
And if there are no questions, we'll take them at the end. Just wait for 20 seconds.
Absolutely. No
Not seeing. There is one. Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, have people looked at the kind of problems that you've looked at, the ANNS problems, but with communication rate constraints? So I guess if every query had to be sent over a network, I guess, then does the problem fundamentally change? Yeah, thanks.
So it is a good question. It's very relevant also because uh, we are looking at like trillions of points, so you cannot store it on a single machine. You will have to store it on a network of on a server or multiple machines. Typically, the way we do it is the way industry does it is they run this problem. I mean, they first partition the entire like trillion vectors into like let's say 1,000 chunks of billion vectors. You build an index locally on each machine on each chunk, and the query just parallelly and independently runs in all the machines and gets the nearest neighbors from the local set of billion. And you have to aggregate this and then re-rank and like take the top k from this set. So typically there is not much communication across machines because there's just one like maybe like a hub or the client just sends it to like a bunch of these machines and then it receives this and then aggregates them and does some local processing on its own. So, but yeah, but the question makes sense. I don't know what sort of models people have looked at in this case.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions, so you can kindly proceed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go into the technical details. So, so as I said, right, like there is a class of algorithms that are very relevant to us. It is called the graph-based nearest neighbor search algorithm. They are really good. So I'll just talk about them uh, high-level details because we are going to build on such a model. So they have very good latency and recall. And in fact, there's a popular blog that actually catalogs hundreds of ANNS algorithms and measures each of them on the same like standardized machine across standardized data sets and measures like the y-axis is the QPS queries per second and the x-axis is the recall. So if you have high recall and high QPS, that means you're in the top right. That means these algorithms are good. All of these algorithms that I have indicated here are graph-based algorithms. Downside, as I said, is they don't scale well because they can only index about 100 million points per 32 GB RAM, whereas we are shooting for a billion points per 32 GB RAM. And the reason is that they have to store two things in main memory. They have to store all the vectors, the 100 million vectors in main memory, which itself consumes a lot of RAM because these are 100-dimensional vectors. Remember. They have to store an auxiliary data structure, which is a graph, also in main memory. And both of them together are quite expensive. And that's why you can't have too many points in a single machine. The limit is typically around 100 to 200 million points per machine of this kind. So now having talked about the drawback, let me just explain what the graph-based scheme is, right? I haven't told you what the graph-based ANNS schemes do. A very clever idea. It's been around for a few years now at least. Again, has its roots in a 90s paper in algorithms conference in the SODA conference. But nowadays they have the real world schemes have come a long way from the initial roots. But I think the original ideas were there from a couple of decades ago. So what's the idea, right? So you have a bunch of vectors in d-dimensional space. What we want to do is we want to associate a vertex. We want to first build a graph. It's an auxiliary data structure where we associate a vertex for each vector. Each vector will have an associated vertex, and these vertices are connected in a graph where we somehow make some clever connections. Okay, I haven't yet told you how these clever connections are built. So this is, let's say, these are the clever connections that we have built. And we find a very central point in this data set and call that as a starting point. So this red vertex here is a starting vertex. So now this query vector arrives, right? Query vector arrives, it is this blue vector. I mean, it's not associated with the graph at all, it's just a vector. But what we want to do is See, like I said, right, if you compare the distance with all the query with all the points, that's a very time cumbersome process. So what we want is to compare with a very few points and still get to the nearest neighbor or candidate nearest neighbors. So this graph is going to help us zoom in to the like where the query is in a spatial sense very quickly. That's the idea of this graph. So what we do is we start with the red node and look at all the neighbors of the red node in the graph. So each of them will have one vector associated with it, right? So I can do the distance comparison between those vectors and this query vector and find out which is the closest vector. So I just move to that vertex in the graph. Now this new vertex will have like new neighbors. It has like 5 neighbors in this graph that I drawn, right? So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 neighbors. I can look at those vectors, do the distance comparison, and move to the closest and repeat. So I move to this vertex and repeat, right? And when do I stop? I can stop at a point which is like a local optimum. Now, if I look at the vectors, if I look at all the neighbors, like I have this vector, and this vector, all of them are further away from the query than where I am at. So that's like a local optimum, and I can output this. So this is the greedy. This is what I'm going to call the greedy search. So now, if the graph is built in a clever way, so that the greedy search should work. That's the aim of the graph building process. I haven't told you how to build the graph yet, but typically all these algorithms, they build the graph in a very clever way. Such that the greedy algorithm, this greedy search, converges very quickly to the nearest neighbor of the query point. So just to get some more intuition, right? Let's go over like super simple examples. Suppose these vectors were not in like very high dimensional space. These vectors were in one dimensional space, which is just points on a line. So I have like a bunch of points on a line, and I want to see what's a good graph where this greedy search actually works. Here is a good graph, right? I just connect each point to its left neighbor and right neighbor. So I have like a very long caterpillar kind of a graph. And I designate my start node as this leftmost vertex S. Okay, I mean, I could designate something else also as a start node, but let's say for simplicity, I designate it as S. Now, when a query arrives, we can, this graph works, right? Because you can start from this node and you compare the distance of S and P1 with the query. P1 is closer, so we will move to P1, right? And next we will move to P2 and so on. And we will eventually stop at P7 because both its neighbors, P6 and P8, are further from the query than P7. So we stop. So notice that this graph actually provably converges to the nearest neighbor of the query for any query queue. And that's the sort of desirable structure that we are looking for. I mean, one thing that's not desirable is we end up doing a lot of distance comparisons, right? Because if the query, for example, was all the way here, then we would essentially compare like all the points. One by one, we are comparing all the points till we get. So that's almost like brute force. Bad for number of distance comparisons. So it's good for reachability, good for accuracy. That is works for all queries, for any query. But it's bad for the number of distance comparisons. Could be bad. I mean, on the other hand, here is a bad navigable graph, right? So here, if this query arrives, you start from S, you move to this P9. But if you look at the neighbors of P9, which are P11 and P1, both of them are further from the query than P9. So you will think that this is the best nearest neighbor, and you will output that, even though P7 is the nearest neighbor. Okay? So this is a bad graph, bad for accuracy. Here is an even better graph, right? So this is actually good for accuracy and good for number of distance comparisons. So it will be better than brute force. Okay? So here is, so I mean, we have this graph that works very well. Now, what if I add some long range connections, right? So imagine that I actually connect, have some clever connections like this. So I have like 2 hop edges. These are like 2 hop edges. And I have like 4 hop edges, or I mean 6 hop edges. So it's like something like a binary tree or something, right? So I have these long connections also. So notice that the number of 2-hop edges I have will be like n over 2, number of 4-hop edges I have will be like n over 4 and so on. So the total number of extra edges that I add is still very small. It will be like n over 2 plus n over 4 plus so on. Like 2, I mean it's at most n. The number of edges is small. And moreover, if a query comes, right, I do very few distance comparisons. So I start from S, I do a distance comparison with P1, P3 and P6. And then immediately I do a distance comparison with P7 and maybe P8 also, and then I stop. So the number of distance comparisons is very small. So it works for accuracy and for distance comparisons. So really, I mean, this for one-dimensional data, this you could easily construct such a graph. You just take like a binary search algorithm and like simulate it in a graph form. So it's not too terribly difficult to come up with something like this. But the real question is the vectors that we have is not one-dimensional, right? So it's really high-dimensional vectors. So how do you build such a graph for high-dimensional vectors, which is both accurate and also it's sparse. The number of distance comparisons that you should do should be small. So that's the real challenge. And I will get to it soon. So I still have some more time, so I'll get to it in a bit. So now let's take that as a given, right? Let's say that we have a way to come up with this graph. Okay. What do you do? How are we going to? Like I said, the graph-based solutions have a drawback in that they have to store not only the full vector data but also the entire graph in main memory. So how are we going to overcome that, right? Because that is what is limiting the scalability of these schemes. They're great for recall, but they're not scalable. I mean, we're going to do like our first attempt is going to be like a very most straightforward thing you would think of, right? Let's move the graph to the SSD. Now there is still like a huge amount of memory that's occupied by just the vectors, right? If I have a billion vectors in 100-dimensional space, that's already 400 gigabytes that you will need of data. If I store all of them in RAM, we cannot afford it because our machines have 32 GB RAM, right? So we can't do that. So let's be even more aggressive. Let's store the vectors also in SSD. So now what do we have? We don't have anything in RAM, so this is great. But what happens at search time, right? What do you do at search time? So we have what does a search do? Like we first need to get the neighbors of the starting point, and at each point in the search, we need to get the neighbors of that vertex, right? So I will have to go to the SSD to fetch the neighbors. So that's one SSD read. That which is okay, which is not too bad all by itself. But I also need to compare the distances to the query of all those points that I fetched. So if a point has like 10 neighbors, then I need to go get the 10 vectors from the disk and then do distance comparisons with all the 10 neighbors to see which point to move to next, to figure out how best to update my graph. So if on average, if there's a degree of a point, then I need to do 1 plus degree many SSD reads at each step of this algorithm. So this ends up making way too many SSD accesses. So the QPS and the QPS becomes very low, the latency becomes very high. This is not the greatest scheme that we could come up with. Okay, so it's great for memory footprint because it's virtually storing nothing in main memory, but the query time takes a big hit because the latency is added. So what we want now is, so remember I told you like relevant works to our work, right? And one of those things that are relevant is this compression based scheme that I spoke about, where you somehow somehow snap all the vectors into like representative vectors and then store only the compressed representative vectors, right? So we're going to draw from those ideas. And now what we do is we will store compressed vectors in memory. So instead of storing nothing, we can store compressed vectors. It's a lossy encoding, but that's okay, right? So now what we do is to figure out which neighbor to move to in this step here, calculate distances. I'm going to use this compressed vectors and get approximate distances. So I don't need to fetch all the vectors from the disk for this step because I have a lossy approximation. I can use that to decide which neighbor to move to. So I only need to get the neighbors of this from the SSD, which is like one SSD read per hop. So now I have, instead of 1 plus degree many, I have brought it down to 1 per hop. And that's a big savings already. But so you might ask, are we done at this point? So the answer is still not really, right? Because now what is the final latency of the search time? If the search starts at a node and then hops like many times, then each hop I incur one SSD read, right? I need to fetch the neighbors at each point. So the latency is directly proportional to the number of hops of this greedy algorithm. And if I take existing graph-based algorithms, they end up having very long search paths because they didn't care, right? For them, it was all in main memory. So there was no notion of like waiting for the SSD access. Going to an SSD and fetching some data from the SSD is much slower than just going to the main memory and fetching it from the memory. Main memory is like orders of magnitude faster than going to the SSD. And that's really the problem, right? They were blissfully unaware of the fact that, oh, the graph is resident on the SSD. So for them, it didn't matter. Whereas for us, it matters. So that's really that brings us to the last piece of this puzzle. So we have to design new algorithms which generate graphs which are not just sparse, but also have a low diameter in terms of this greedy walk size. So they have like 10x fewer diameter, which directly says that the latency is 10x faster if you take existing algorithms. And the key intuition here is that you can think of these algorithms as higher dimensional analogs of this binary search that I spoke about. So in the one-dimensional case, I just gave you this binary search graph, right? You can think of these graphs as higher dimensional analogs of binary search, albeit in a heuristic sense, in a not necessarily provable sense. Okay, so I have a couple of slides about the graph algorithm. So if there is time, I can cover it. If not, I can skip because this is like the crux of it is talking about how we build this graph.
Yeah, Ravi, please go ahead. We have about 10 minutes at least. Yeah, please.
Okay,
thanks.
Fine. I'll talk about it. So how we build the graph is in the following. So the idea is, like I said, right? We want to build a graph where this greedy search algorithm works. So what we are going to do is to shoot for the following goal. We want to build some graph which is sparse, such that if I start from this root node S, which is like a central node of this graph, right? And if I run the greedy search, so I want to build a graph, right? And I have this starting point S. And imagine that I look at some other base point P. It's not a query, it's just some other base point P because I have no idea where the query is going to come. I'm just going to make sure that the greedy walk is able to reach every other base point. So I'm going to pretend that this P is the query and I run the greedy walk starting from S. I want it to converge to T. If it converges to T, then that's if it converges to T for every T, then I know that the graph is able to reach all the regions of space. I also want the number of hops to be small. So if I'm able to achieve both of these properties, I say that the graph is a win for us. So how do we do this? How do we build this graph? So we build it in a very iterative refinement kind of way. So we start with a graph which is sparse, but is hardly good for this greedy walk, right? It doesn't reach many points using the greedy walk. So for example, I have some graph and I have this base point P1. And if I run this greedy walk trying to reach P1 from the starting point S, I make one hop, I make one hop, I make another hop, and I stop here. All this from this point, all the neighbors are bad. They don't get me towards P1 at all. This is the closest to P1 I can get using a greedy walk. How do I make this graph better? I just add some edges, right? I add all the edges to P1 from the vertices that were visited on the search path. Now notice that if I run the greedy search after this updation, I can reach P1 starting from S. In fact, I can reach it in direct link. I can reach it with one hop, two hops. Now I find is there some other point P2 which is not reachable. And in this case, if I search for P2, the greedy walk ends here. All the neighbors of this point are further away from P2 than this point. It's like a local optimum. I add these links. And now P2 is reachable. But what's happening is that the graph is becoming denser and denser. And dense graphs are not good for us, right? Because if the graph has very high degree, then at those points, I need to make a huge number of distance comparisons. I don't want that because that again like tends towards like a brute force kind of a thing. Because the higher the degree, then the higher the distance comparisons, which is the cost, computational cost. So I want low degree as well as low diameter. low diameter in the greedy walk size. Greedy diameter. So if I keep adding edges, then the diameter is fine, but the degree blows up. So what we do is something called a pruning procedure. So we look at why. So this pruning procedure is where this intuition of binary search comes into play. We look at why a certain edge is needed in the graph. Right? A certain edge is needed if there is some search path which starts at S, reaches this P1, and then goes towards this, and walks to P2, and then goes towards P8. We ask, okay, why do we really need this edge P1, P2, and can we get rid of this edge? The answer is we can get rid of this edge P1, P2 if I have an edge to some other node P3, which is significantly closer to P2 than P1 itself. So for example, if this distance P3, P2 is much smaller than the distance P1, P2, then we are going to say that, okay, P1 can actually reach something in the vicinity of P2. If it is not P2 exactly, it's okay. It can reach something in the vicinity of P2, and that should be good enough for us. Right? Maybe then the search, maybe there are other ways for the search to carry on. So the requirement that we enforce is that P3 should be like much closer, like factor of 2 closer, this half here, to P2 than P1 itself. And this is the rule that we use for pruning. And if you apply this rule on one-dimensional data, you actually recover the binary search kind of graph. So that's the intuitive generalization of binary search to higher dimensions. And if you apply our procedure, if you start with a random graph, it actually slowly refines itself over time and ends up with a very good navigable graph. That's what I show in the illustration here. So that's really the system that I wanted to speak about. We store the graph on the SSD, the full vectors also on the SSD, and we store this lossy compressed vectors in main memory, and that's what gives us the savings. And to make sure that the latency does not blow up, we have to come up with new graph generation algorithms. So that's the entire system that we do. And I'll skip this slide because this shows how good the graph is. I'll compare these two in a sort of an evaluation. So here is some moderately sized data, right? It's 100 million vectors in 100 dimensional space. Just the data alone is 13 GB for this case. So if I take existing state-of-the-art graph-based indices, they occupy 35 to 50 GB of DRAM. And they can get this 95% accuracy with a latency of 1 to 2 milliseconds. If you apply our algorithm and only store the compressed vectors in main memory, the memory footprint comes down by a factor of 10x, right? It's only 4.5 GB. We occupy the bulk of the storage is on the SSD. And notice that for the same recall, the latency is actually not too bad. We can take only a small hit in the latency. So just to say that with the moderate deterioration in performance, we can gain significantly in terms of scalability. Now, if you take super large data sets, like 1 billion points, the graph-based indices don't even fit in a machine with 32 GB RAM, right? Only thing that fits in is this purely compression-based scheme, which takes a big hit of recall. So the accuracy goes down to like 50, 60, the red curve here. Whereas if you look at our index, we can actually store the entire billion points with 32 GB RAM, 550 GB of SSD footprint, and get very high accuracy with very low latencies. And that's basically showing how much improvement we can get. And this is really what the benefit of DiskGAN is, right? It enables scenarios that are previously too expensive to even think about, or you scale down the machine cost. If you took like 10,000 machines earlier, you would only need 1,000 machines. Or if you are looking at like trillions or even like much more than that, you could not even think of such things earlier. You could think of them now, and you should actually go for, approach them. So, so we have, indeed, we are talking to various partners within the company, and we are in advanced stages of deployment for various such. Like I said, it's a very fundamental problem. Many of them use this, and not just that. The algorithm and the system are open source. So if you are interested, it's on GitHub. If you just email me, I can give you the link, and you can use it for your own approximate nearest neighbor search functionality. That's really what I wanted to talk about. Hopefully, I have convinced you that this problem of ANNS is a very fundamental problem, a lot of applications, and existing techniques don't scale or they lose out on accuracy. And we are able to get the best of both worlds by designing new algorithms that leverage SSDs in a nice, non-trivial manner. And most importantly, I think I just want to say that the problem is very simple. It has a lot of applications, and it's a very ripe field for more research. I mean, it's already a very active field, but I think hopefully, if you are interested in this, you can think about more such problems. And that's really just all that I wanted to cover. Thank you, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. So if the audience can hear me, if you have any questions and posts, I request you to enter them in the Q&A. Please enter the question, and what I'll then do is I'll read out the question and request Ravi to answer it. So please do post your questions. You should see them in your window. Thank you. So Ravi, while in case there are questions, but meanwhile, if I can ask you a question.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
What sort of footprints are we looking at for today's searches? Like how many machines are involved, how many data centers are involved, or like what are we looking at?
So number of machines that we are looking at, I mean, there are multiple stages in the search pipeline, but just for this vector search itself, you are looking at 50,000 machines, which is just, and then they are geo-replicated. So like 4x geo-replication. So you might look at like hundreds of thousands of machines. And these are industry scale machines.
Okay.
So we are trying to bring that cost down. Basically, yeah, that's, and it's a growing thing. So this is just for, this is currently the limit because they don't vectorize all possible documents out there just because of the cost. If you could vectorize all possible documents, you would, but the cost is a limitation. So we end up picking the most important websites and vectorizing them. We don't, but if you could have an enabler of vectorizing all possible documents, then you would go for it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. We'll just wait. There is about a 30-second delay.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah. So on the mobile, it is still on your slide, disk scan on moderate data. So that's where, yeah. Okay. So there is a latency. I will. I guess it doesn't matter. We have to live in our own timeline. There is a question, and I can pose. I'll read it out for you.
Sure.
Is there a way to think about complexity of these algorithms without having to do experiments at that scale if one doesn't have the infrastructure available?
Excellent question. So there is actually a lot of work on the complexity of nearest neighbor search algorithms. So the real goal is, think of it as the following, right? You have some data, n vectors in d-dimensional space, and these queries, the baseline that you can think about is you can have a space of order of nd, which is just to store all the vectors. And the query time cost is order of nd computations, because you will do like a brute force distance comparison with all the n base vectors and output the closest. So you can ask, okay, can I get significantly better query time? Because that's what is like, I don't want to wait hundreds of seconds for my search results. Can I get significantly better query time with maybe slightly worse space? I mean, that's one target, one possible question you could shoot for. And that's indeed one of our remarkable theory papers. I think in the 90s, shows that I can get sublinear query time. So I can get like query time as close to like suppose instead of n times d, I can get square root n times d query time, or n to the fourth root times d query time, which is very good, right? Like which it really gets me back into the game. And the space is not too much bad. It's like n to the power of 1.5 times. I mean, it's really bad if you look at the sort of data that we are looking at, But just to think about moderate size data and theory problem and so on, it makes sense. Like n to the polynomial space, polynomial in n space, and sublinear query time, and they can get like approximate nearest neighbors. So really, the question you could ask is the trade-off between what is the quality of your results, what is the query complexity, and what is the space complexity. And if you are able to understand the interplay between these three parameters, that's just that you can ask, okay, design an algorithm which has a good trade-off between these three parameters. It doesn't have to be graph-based; it can be anything, and that is really the thing that one could formulate and think about without any experimental work.
Great, thank you. There's one more question. It's a short question. Where have you applied this algorithm?
I mean, that's a good question. We have applied it in Bing within the company in Bing. I'm not sure how much I can talk about that. Let me just say in certain subsets of Bing search. Not, I mean, I cannot say that it's powering Bing search, the entire Bing search today, but in certain subsets of Bing search.
Okay.
But the ambition, I mean, the aim is to scale to like the entire Bing search.
Okay, thanks. It's okay. Again, a request to the audience: if there are questions, kindly post them. We'll take up your question. Thank you. Just 2 minutes. Something has come. Okay, I don't see any more questions, Ravi.
Okay.
Just 1 second. I just yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't see any more questions. So Ravi, with this, let us close the webinar today. So thank you very much on behalf of INAE Bangalore chapter for accepting the invitation and for giving this really nice talk. I learned a lot for sure. It's quite exciting work, I should say. And look forward to meeting you in person sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When
Likewise, thanks a lot for the opportunity, and I think yeah, hopefully it was people took away something, and thanks for joining.
Oh, 1 second, there's a question. There's a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, any query complexity bounds for any query complexity lower bounds for ANN?
Yes, so there are like, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I will have to think. I mean, I will have to think off the top of my head. So, like I said, there are these hashing-based approaches that have some upper bounds, and so those are actually seminal papers. And there have been follow-up papers that show that under certain assumptions, there are some lower bounds also for those problems. So there are some lower bounds. I don't remember off the top of my head what structure they possess. I could, I mean, if you could email me, I can point you to the relevant papers. That might be the best answer I can give.
Okay, yeah. Ravi, can you share your email ID? Just spell it, I guess so.
Yeah, it's RAKRI.
Okay, yeah.
At Microsoft.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, very nice. Excellent. Okay, so it's 6 o'clock. So again, thank you very much, Ravi. So with that, we'll close the presentation. And request to the audience, please do track us on the 3rd or the 4th Thursday of every month. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you and good night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.